A very warm welcome, everyone, to this information session. We'll just let people join in for a few more seconds, and then we'll have a go and get started. All right, so a very warm welcome to this information session about the infrastructure, sustainability ratings, and ESG and sustainable finance. My name is Monique Isenheim, and I'm head of market development at the ISC. We'll kick off in a minute, but before we do that, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands from which we are coming together today. We acknowledge their deep connection to land, water, and culture, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And tēnā koutou katoa for our attendance in New Zealand as well. If we go to the next slide, so what we wanted to cover today is really to give you an overview of how IS ratings can work for ESG and sustainable finance. We will start off with a quick introduction to the ISC and the IS ratings and the benefits of doing IS ratings. And then we will move into talking about how IS ratings can be used for ESG and sustainable finance. We've got a short case study, and then we will do a little bit of a quick overview of some of the credits that are covered in the IS ratings to give you a sense of how they can be used. And we do have some time for Q&As planned at the end as well. So feel free to use the Q&A box that you can see on the bottom of your screen and pop in any questions as they come up. Just to get a feeling for who's joining us today, we have a very quick survey. If you just want to select the answer that best suits where you are sitting in the infrastructure ecosystem, that gives us a bit of an idea, and we can make sure we tailor today's session according to that. Just giving it a few more seconds. Okay, thank you. Let's have a look. Okay. We've got a lot of proponents, consultants, and contractors. So a fair few of you will be pretty familiar with the IS ratings tools, but we've also got some people from finance and other stakeholders. So we will talk a little bit about IS and IS ratings. Some of you may be well familiar with that, so we'll keep it relatively short. But for any of you who are not as familiar, we will give you a quick overview so that you can see how it all works. Okay, and so with that, I'm handing over to our first speaker, Patrick Hastings, Chief Delivery Officer and Capacity Officer.
Thanks, Monique. Much appreciated. So excitingly, it's nice to be back in the webinar space. It's been a little while since I last participated. To start us off, I thought I'd start by talking about who we are. It's so great to see so many of our members on the call. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us, and welcome to those of you who this is a reasonably new experience for you. The ISC is a membership-based organisation. We're a not-for-profit peak body, and we operate in Australia and New Zealand. Our key purpose is to ensure that all infrastructure delivers social, cultural, environmental, and economic benefit. We do that through our current strategic plan, and our strategic plan has four pillars. The first one is leadership, or sustainability leadership, which is where we focus on driving global best practice and infrastructure across the regions. We then have thriving industry, where we look to connect and collaborate collaborate with our industry to build capacity, capability, and understanding of sustainable infrastructure. In the market transformation pillar, we're looking to advocate for change to support the industry to rapidly transition. And then finally, in the organizational health category, we are looking to practice what we preach. As I said, we're a membership-based organization. And we have over 220 members across the entire value chain of infrastructure, from contractors to government agencies to asset owners, as well as your designers, consultants, suppliers, and a lot of the not-for-profit sector. This is really an overview of, or just a high-level snapshot of some of our members, obviously not a complete list. But really just to highlight the breadth of those that are really starting to focus and consider sustainability in their journey. To do or to meet the intention of our strategic pillars, we have a whole range of products and services we offer in the market. Central to what we do is the IS rating scheme, and in the upcoming slides, I'll go into that in more detail. But surrounding that, we have a training arm or a learning and development arm where we look to build the capability and capacity of the sector. We look to partner with our members and with the broader sector to drive thought leadership and publications to help the industry not just understand where things are at and what best practice looks like in the Australian and New Zealand context, but also to provoke the industry to think about things differently or drive towards greater practice. We also look to bring the community together, to bring the sector together through our events, conferences, and awards, to recognise performance, but also to collaborate on where we could go next, or where the next frontiers for sustainability and infrastructure are. And then finally, looking to work collectively as a sector to provide leadership on how sustainability will function within infrastructure and what infrastructure sustainability looks like in the present, but further into the future. In terms of the IS rating scheme, so it's important to note that you'll hear throughout this presentation and more generally in your encounters with the ISC that we regularly talk about the IS rating scheme and IS rating tools. The IS rating scheme is a series of rating tools that cover the entire life cycle of an asset, both within each tool, but then collectively across the tools. Currently, the IS rating scheme is designed as a broad-based rating scheme, so it can be used across all asset classes, and you'll see the listing of asset classes there on the screen. Currently, we have about 223 projects registered with the ISC. To date, we've worked with over 330 projects, and we have currently over $217 billion worth of assets under rating. As you'll see in the top corner there, the ISC is the IS rating scheme and its various rating tools are being used across all jurisdictions in Australia. The way in which IS ratings have been uptaken are sort of through two different aspects. The first one, and the most common one, is policy positions taken by asset owners or regulators, where they require assured outcomes through the IS rating tool based on a CapEx, capital expenditure threshold. For the vast majority of states or states and territories and New Zealand, that's built off a dollar figure, which is usually roughly around the 100 million, with a couple of very, very bold and progressive positions in that 10 million or $50 million range. These policy positions manifest themselves into ratings in a variety of different forms, whether that be through the planning tool, the design and as-built tool, or the operations tool. In terms of In terms of some of the other exciting pieces, our planning tool, which has been in pilot phase for the last 5 years over in Western Australia, is in the final throes of being reviewed to come out of pilot and into the broader marketplace. And we're expecting that to be entering the market in the first half of the new financial year. The other piece that's been under development, and a huge call out to Westpac and the New Zealand Government Innovation Fund, is the IS Essentials project. IS Essentials rating tool, which is for projects under 100 million. And it's really a scaled down version of the broader rating tool, design and as-built rating tool, and made fit for purpose for those smaller projects. It will also excitingly be the first digital rating tool that the ISC releases. That is also due out in the first half of the new financial year. I might at that point hand over to Kerry to talk in more depth about our rating scheme and the rating tools, and why IS ratings are important for the sector.
Great. I just need someone maybe to help turning my video on. Oh, there we go. Thanks very much. Hi everybody, kia ora, and great to be here with you all today. Amazing to see the number of people participating in this webinar. And so I'm just going to talk in the next few slides about why IS ratings. IS rating categories and credits are aligned to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that really is reflected here on this slide, just to show the 4 themes that we cover within the IS rating: governance, environment, social, and economic. And also within each of those, a number of key categories. These are aligned to the 17, as you see down the bottom, UN Sustainable Development Goals, and really just wanting to reinforce that our scheme addresses sustainability across the full system. When we talk about sustainability metrics, we talk about them across all of these areas, and we measure and drive performance in all of these areas. So really where the challenges exist on a global, national and local level, we are aiming to push beyond minimum compliance to really delivering, as Patrick said, better outcomes and benefits from an environmental, economic and social perspective. One of the key topics of discussion currently is around greenhouse gas emissions, and if we can move to the next slide. And we know from some work that was done in partnership with the IS Council a couple of years back, that 70% of greenhouse gas emissions in Australia, and that will be reflected to some degree in the New Zealand marketplace, are related to infrastructure, both in terms of those emissions that are embodied in materials and construction of infrastructure assets, from the operations of infrastructure assets, and also the activities associated with those. So our tool, while it has that very broad coverage from a sustainability point of view in terms of those topics, we are also responding to the real need that we're all focused on at the moment around climate change, both from a risk point of view, but also very clearly from a mitigation management point of view, and driving towards net zero. One of the things that you know, we all say again and again within business management and also within our sector is that, you know, we measure what matters, and the IS scheme really is focused on doing that. If we can move to the next slide, that'd be great. So our scheme across those SDG areas and across those 4 themes and our credits really is focused on, yes, at a individual project and asset level, driving improved sustainability performance, but also we want to see collectively across the sector. We're really committed to bold impact, and on an annual basis, we report on the impacts collectively of our membership and those who are using the rating. And you can just see here some of the statistics from our last impact report. So reductions in life cycle emissions associated with materials, for example, waste diverted from landfill of projects that are undertaking the rating, and also a number there in terms of the reductions related to materials, water use, but in other areas amongst our social credits, really driving stakeholder engagement as a key element of sustainability and delivering sustainable outcomes, and also driving and rewarding innovation. So at the individual project and asset level, our scheme operates, but then collectively, we're all about kind of driving change within industry. And there was a study that was done back in 2018, commissioned by the Infrastructure Sustainability Council by RPS, who are a professional services firm that looked at the return on investment of utilising the scheme. If we can move to the next slide, thanks. And that study showed that at least for every dollar spent, at least the return was $1.60 for every dollar spent, but up to $2.40. And that just included those elements and benefits that could be monetized. But there are some examples there also on the slide of other areas that we know that were more challenging to monetize, but were also additional benefits in terms of human capital development. For example, benefits of open spaces, the kind of whole ecosystem services aspects related to improvements related to ecology, etc. So a real demonstration of the investment in the IS rating scheme, but also by our partners in really driving sustainability outcomes that are going to benefit their organisations and projects, but also the wider society, community and the environment. Just a little bit about how the ratings work, and as Monique said, there's many of you on the call who understand this, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but just also cognizant of those who are new to our scheme. So our scheme operates, provides rating tools across the whole life cycle of infrastructure development and operations, from the planning phase through to operations. And in planning, which is a really critical point for embedding sustainability outcomes, we're putting some, as Patrick said, some real focus around that at the moment. So at both strategic and detailed planning, our new tools that we're updating will reflect those two phases, design and as built, and operations. And we're also working with a pilot group. I'm sure some of you are on the call today, in developing our essentials rating, which is for smaller projects. The ratings go through a 4-step process of registration, assessment, verification and certification. Really critical part of the scheme is that third-party assurance. So measuring what matters and having that verified through a robust assurance process, and then rewarding and demonstrating and promoting those great outcomes to the project team, but also more widely within industry. The performance bench, our scheme sets performance benchmarks, so we're not just about providing process and management systems, although that's a key part of the governance is a key part of delivering positive outcomes, but at each level. And so within from our 4 themes that we talked about earlier to the range of categories under each theme, and then down at the credit level, we reward beyond business as usual performance. And we set those benchmarks that are 3 different levels of benchmarks that projects and assets can aspire to. For those who are starting out, they may start at level 1 and 2. And then for those that are in a leadership position, they're really pushing to achieve the highest possible outcomes. We also have a really clear continuous improvement process as part of the scheme, so that as the majority of projects get to that kind of level 2 and level 3, we are continually looking to say, well, you know, is the benchmark, can that benchmark be pushed, you know, higher? And I think at the moment, particularly, we're doing some work around net zero and how that's reflected in our scheme, which you'll see quite clearly in the new planning tool as that emerges. The other couple of things that we do in terms of making sure that the scheme is tailored to the project or the asset that is being rated at the time is we undertake a materiality assessment, and this means that we can tailor the tool to the context of the project. We help identify the risks and opportunities through that process, and also like what are the particular impacts of these in these particular areas for the project context, and also what are the priority issues for stakeholders, so that allows the scheme to be used across a variety of asset types through the materiality process. We also have a base case process, which as well, as we've mentioned earlier, continues to drive continuous improvement. Our base case sets the bar, which says, you know, this is how a project would deliver with business as usual practices, and then you're measuring and showing, demonstrating reductions against business as usual through the base case. As is demonstrated here on the slide on the right, the actual case really takes into account the initiatives, sustainability initiatives and sustainability outcomes that have been achieved, and it's demonstrated against that base case. I'm now going to hand over to Monique, who's going to pick up on that and really take you through how the IS rating scheme connects to the ESG and sustainable finance sector. Thanks, Monique.
Thanks so much, Kerry. Okay, so just starting with some context. So when we talk about ESG and sustainable finance, and a lot of similar terms are getting used, really what we're talking about is a spectrum of responsible investment strategies or philosophies. And they really start what's here on the left-hand side with ESG, ESG standing for Environment, Social and Governance reporting. And that's mostly driven by the need to comply with regulations. So it's really about minimizing risk, and it's a more compliant, defensive strategy of approaching that topic. And then as we move to the right, you get all the way to the more proactive and values and impact-driven strategies like sustainability themed investment and impact investment or sustainable finance, which is really decidedly focused on the impact of the financing and really tries to achieve outcomes through that investment tool. So as we go through this presentation, when we talk about ESG, it's really more looking at the compliance side of things. And when we talk about sustainable finance, it's more about that opportunity-driven investment strategy that sees opportunity and sustainability. And really what we're seeing is that both of them are really on the rise. So across the spectrum that we just talked about, we can see that both the total value as well as the absolute proportion of responsible investment assets in the total market is growing. And we can see that in Australia, but really it's very much a global trend. Now, when we're going to look at what drives that on the next slide, for ESG, it's really increasing regulatory requirements very much worldwide, and even in Australia and in New Zealand, we can see a lot of that happening. For example, APRA has provided some guidance to the organizations that it governs on how to align their ESG reporting on the TCFD. So that's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures framework. That is really about identifying and managing climate-related risks and opportunities. So far, that's a guidance, but it really speaks to how companies and organizations should report their risks to the market, to the broader audience and stakeholders. Then we also have ASIC, and they're really targeting greenwashing, both as very much going after investments and superannuation at the moment. And so that's more the messages that are more customer facing and really making sure that the green credentials actually holding up. And they're really making some pretty substantial moves there. And also the Australian Treasury is really looking at disclosure requirements for the larger Australian businesses and financial institutions relating to carbon opportunities and risks. And so just working through that at the moment, and we are likely to see some stronger regulation coming out in almost from next year already. Then in New Zealand, it's already in place. We've got climate disclosure standards in place from this year for larger organizations and banks and insurance. And so that's already very much happening. And then on the international stage, the IFRS, which is the body that creates accounting standards, which many countries are following, including Australia and New Zealand. They're developing sustainability disclosure standards, and those are very likely to impact accounting in Australia and New Zealand. So we can really see that the regulation on the ESG side is really tightening. And then when we go on the other end of the scale, impact finance or sustainable finance, we can see that really there's been a big uptake in those green or sustainable finance products. So just to look at the spectrum here, we've got green and social bonds, which are usually more public facing and where debt is taken on for green or social projects. We've got the loans, green or social loans, so they could go into green projects like renewable energy projects, for example, or social housing. And then we've got the SLLs, the sustainability linked loans, where as part of the loan, the borrower makes some commitments in terms of their sustainability performance. And on the basis of that, their loan conditions can change, and usually once they achieve certain KPIs, then they get preferential conditions like better interest rates, for example. So a lot happening in that market as well. And then moving to the next slide. For sustainability linked loans, the way they work, usually they have about those 5 components. So they select KPIs around what are the metrics that really matter in terms of sustainability for that project. Then they calibrate, they define the sustainability targets, whatever they may be, and what they consider ambitious but achievable. And then the loan characteristics that go with it. So once you achieve the SPTs, what changes in terms of the loan? So for example, the interest rates. There's usually a reporting requirement, normally annually, and then there's a need to have those metrics verified, often through external verification. So that's basically how they work. And so with IS ratings, we can help both the investors and lender side, as well as the asset owners who take up the loans through our framework. And really in the area of rising cost of capital, so rising interest rates, where real asset like infrastructure becomes, when you compare the returns, it becomes much more much closer to term deposits or bonds. And so in this environment, especially sustainable finance options might be really, really attractive. So then when we go into ESG and how IS ratings can help with that, basically you can see an example here. It's a whale project. It's not the same that we cover in the case study because those data are confidential, but you can see here in one example of a project that has taken on an IS operations ratings, how they improve their performance across a range of different metrics from waste, materials, greenhouse gas, and ecological impacts, for example. So all of those data become available and transparent through the process of going through an IS ratings, and they do become verified, and so you've got that third-party assurance on them, and then that can feed directly into your ESG reporting. Again, looking at the other end of the spectrum, looking at sustainable finance, really the IS ratings tools can be used for structuring an SLL, for example. So over a time, this is an example where the IS operations rating is used as a basis for the contract. And when the rating is pursued, certain levels can be achieved. And with the achievement of those levels, certain credit characteristics such as the interest rates can change. So if the project achieves the desired rating, then the interest rate could go down, for example, as a reward. So you can, when you structure the SLL, you can structure it around the overall ratings outcome. So say this is the award level that you want the project to achieve, or you could single out specific credits or levels of credits. Say, for example, we're really interested in the energy credits or in the resilience credits, and therefore we make some really create some really pointed requirements around specific levels. So there's a lot of flexibility depending on what the desired outcomes are and what the philosophy is that drives the investment. One question that we do get every now and then is how do IS ratings stack up with TCFD requirements? And this is sort of showing you how they can work together. Basically, IS ratings are asset level based and give you performance rate metrics and a rating, whereas the TCFD reporting is usually covering the whole organization and is more talking to disclosure requirements. So you do report, but it's not necessarily talking to how the company is actually performing. Although in a lot of cases, once you have reported a risk, there will be a strong drive to actually manage the risk as well and achieve outcomes. But with the IS ratings, what you really get is assured outcomes that you can talk about in your ESG report. And so TCFD is really focusing on climate-related risks and objectives. So IS ratings data can feed into that, but we can also see that the spectrum of ESG requirement is getting bigger with the ISBB or the Task Force for Nature-related financial disclosure. So the scope is getting bigger, and so once the regulation on that becomes tighter, there's a lot more data that can then also go from the IS rating into that sustainability reporting. Another question that we do get is how do IS ratings work with GRESB ratings? So the difference here is that IS looks at the whole asset life cycle and is available at each of those stages, and it looks at the asset level. GRESB, again, addresses reporting requirements. So it's not so much about outcomes, but about how you report the risks. And it can be given both on an asset level as well as on a portfolio level. And again, those data that become available can then feed into your TCFD report or whatever the equivalent is in Australia and New Zealand, and in the sustainability reporting once that becomes mandated or you choose to take that up. Okay, so in summary, why are IS ratings useful for ESG or sustainable finance? It's infrastructure specific rating with third-party assured outcomes. So going beyond reporting, it is asset level based, and it covers the whole asset life cycle. There's a really high capability in the industry to obtain IS ratings. It's nothing new. We've been around for 10 years. And so especially with the bigger projects, the industry is very well aware of IS ratings and very capable in getting really good outcomes and going through the whole process. The data that you get from going through the process spans across environment, social, economic, and governance outcomes. So it goes beyond climate. It enables values-based investment where that's the strategy, and it covers all types of infrastructure assets. It also allows for comparison or benchmarks between those different assets. And from a broader impact perspective, IS ratings really drive continuous improvement and broader impact across the industry by moving the goalposts for what's state of the art and sustainable. Okay, and now just a case study on where IS ratings have been used for sustainable finance. Yeah, so the project we're talking about is the Reliance Rail refinancing. Reliance Rail is a private-public partnership with the New South Wales government, and it really covers the Waratah train fleet and their maintenance and the depot. And originally, there were no contractual requirements to improve the sustainability or to obtain an IS ratings, but the contract partners decided that that was a really important factor for them. And so they issued a $1.8 billion green sustainability linked loan. It was a consortium of banks, including CBA and BNP. And so they agreed on some green standards, and then also the whole sustainability linked targets. And the IS operations ratings was the main metric for that. So over an initial 10-year period, they got some really significant potential margin savings on the interest rate. So there's a real incentive of improving the sustainability scores as quickly as possible. What exactly those terms look like is that's commercial confident. Sorry, that's we can't share that, but there's definitely really a vision towards really good sustainability outcomes that manifest in that contract. So this is one of the first projects that have gone through this process, and it's a really good lighthouse project, and hopefully we'll have some uptake of that in the future. And now I'll hand back to Kerry, who will go through some sample credits for those of you who are not as familiar, to show you how they link to ESG performance and sustainable finance.
Great, thanks, Monique. And I just wanted to, just as Monique says, just for those who are not familiar with the credits at a detailed level, I'm just going to give a couple of examples just to demonstrate kind of how they work and how they would influence outcomes at the project and asset level. So first one, just looking at the leadership and management credits. And as you see there, they range from integrating sustainability and then identifying risks and opportunities around sustainability that the project can then respond to. And also because of our commitment across influencing industry, we also reward knowledge sharing. If we go to the next slide, just shows you in the leadership integrating sustainability, how the three levels work. So it's all about initially setting those objectives and putting a management plan in place, then making sure that those objectives and targets that you set are robust and represent the priorities of your stakeholders. So we reward the involvement of stakeholders, and then also taking those targets and objectives and making them publicly available so that it's sharing more broadly with the community and stakeholders. If we move to the next slide, then which is the from design through to construction. Once the project has progressed and is able to then demonstrate the outcomes that they've achieved. Again, we reward projects for doing that in a public way, so that they're publishing against those targets publicly. And as Monique demonstrated on the slides that she had, taking the data from the project that's been reviewed and presenting that in a sustainability report, and in a sustainability report that has been independently reviewed by a suitably qualified professional, so that it's reporting against the appropriate standards, whether that's the Global Reporting Initiative or the IIR. To demonstrate that it's really looking at sustainability from a very robust and rigorous approach. If we move to the next slide, this shows you an example of how we look at energy and carbon, and it's really applying within our credits for energy and carbon, it's applying the hierarchy, starting initially with avoiding and reducing energy demand at the first credit. So it's all about rewarding avoidance and reduction. At the second credit, it's around substitution. So using renewable energy for that energy that is still required to both construct and then to operate the asset, and then really with offsetting towards net zero as a last resort. So really encouraging projects and rewarding projects for using that energy and carbon hierarchy. Embodied carbon in terms of carbon and materials is also rewarded through the scheme. In its own credit, which looks at materials use, it applies a similar hierarchy where it goes from avoiding and reducing, and then through to using materials with sustainability credentials, and then in our new scheme, bringing the residual carbon emissions through and looking to offset those residual. We can go to the next just to demonstrate that not only are we looking, as we've said all along, not just at the environmental and particularly carbon aspects, but also across a range of social and community aspects as well. So here's the example that we've got here is around heritage, which looks at, again, assessing current values and then showing how you either maintain or enhance values, and finally using community satisfaction or testing the enhancements and interpretation that you've made against the community so that they can give feedback on their satisfaction and support for the changes or developments that have been undertaken. So again, demonstrating a hierarchy type approach. Thanks. I'll hand back to you now, Monique, I think, for Q&A. It'd be great to hear from people. I think we've had a few questions already.
Thank you. Yes, we've answered a few questions directly in the chat. One question from Grace, is there any threshold or cap for carbon offsetting? Carrie, I'll hand that to you.
Great. So in the scheme, we will reward up to 100%. So as you know, as highlighted through the slides that I just showed on the hierarchy, we really are pushing for that avoidance and reduction and then substitution, but we will reward up to 100%. I mean, clearly there's kind of boundary issues around that, but scope, we look at capital, operational and user carbon, so the carbon associated with actually building and the materials within that for the infrastructure itself, then carbon associated with operating the infrastructure over the life cycle, and that we do highlight the area of user carbon or enabled carbon, and we are kind of developing ways of focusing on that, but the main focus of our offsetting is around the capital and operational carbon at this stage. We talked a little bit about the planning rating, and the planning rating where those decisions are made super early and are really going to affect the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the infrastructure. We are building in more challenging requirements there to really drive towards net zero.
Thank you. And then there's another question about decarbonization targets in alignment to Paris Agreement, which is also in that space. Carrie?
Yeah, sure, great. So it's in terms of decarbonisation targets and alignment, we also reflect that within our scheme. So we ask projects to consider decarbonisation of the grid, so that we're really focused on getting the projects to, and asset owners and operators to focus on the things that they are able to do in terms of both construction but also in terms of operation. And we are rewarding them for their activities while recognising that decarbonisation is also part of what's going to support net zero, so things that happen at the grid level. And in our latest scheme, Grace, oh no, who was asking that question? In our latest scheme, we have called that out in particular, and for our existing scheme, we've also undertaken a ruling which gives guidance to projects in that space.
Thank you. I think we can take that off. How well do the IS ratings cover natural capital and apply to potential alignment with the upcoming TNFD?
Yeah, let
framework?
me pick up on that, and any other comments from any of the other speakers, that'd be great too. But so we have which we haven't highlighted in particular today, but we have an ecology, probably in at least two of our areas, and maybe others might want to add to that as well. But we have one credit that's around place, so it's all around kind of urban and landscape design. I'm looking at the whole context of the project, identifying where there are opportunities for connectivity, particularly from a land use point of view or from a green infrastructure point of view. So that's all in the place credits, as I say, under urban and landscape design. And again, there are 3 different levels that we reward there. And we also have a particular category around ecology, which is where projects would identify the ecological values of the area that they're developing, and then look for and implement opportunities related to enhancing and improving those values. And we again really call out different benchmarks that will reward the either maintenance in terms of limiting impact, and or the enhancement in terms of restoration. And we particularly call out the opportunity to enhance at the project level. So what projects can do on site or aligned adjacent to sites that really enhance the ecological values of the environment that they're operating within. So very aligned to the TNFD in that space.
Thank you. A question from Andrew. Am I correct in thinking that the ISC performs life cycle assessment and gives sustainability ratings based off these results?
So Andrew, I guess there are, we use life cycle assessments for our materials. We assess in a number of areas. So we assess across, as you've seen, the different categories. We have a particular credits that look at materials use, and the materials use and the rewards rewards, or the way that people are rewarded there, is based on a life cycle assessment framework. We have our own calculator, the IS Materials calculator, that uses life cycle assessment, and that can incorporate also life cycle assessments that are done through EPDs from product suppliers or material suppliers. So that life cycle assessment then feeds into the points and levels that are awarded for materials. And then also when we look at energy and carbon, we are looking at energy and carbon across the life cycle. So collectively, there are a number of components that really are a life cycle assessment of the infrastructure as a whole.
Thank you. A question from Ben. How do you see private versus government leadership in pushing infrastructure sustainability? The mandating of IS ratings primarily by government agency implicitly suggests government has been the key driver for the ISC to date. Do you see this changing? Patrick, I might give that to you. Yep.
I've managed to press my hand instead of the mute button. Always good. A great question, Ben. With regards to government, yes, government has predominantly been the leader to date over the last 10 years in terms of the uptake of the IS rating scheme and driving sustainability in the transport sector. What we're starting to see is that as broader asset classes start to utilise the IS rating scheme, particularly the energy sector and water sector, we are starting to see private organisations or public companies starting to utilise the IS rating scheme, and we expect that trend to start growing. I would also give a bit of a shout out to Transurban, who have been using the IS rating scheme and mandating the IS rating scheme for a long time. But yes, there is definitely starting to be a shift within the marketplace.
Thank you. We've got one more question. It's probably more a statement. So we've got a few minutes left. If somebody still wants to type in their last minute questions, now's your chance. Yeah. Okay, otherwise, you're very welcome to be in touch with any questions, or if you'd like to chat further, we're here. Maybe just bringing up that slide with the contact details could be useful. There's one other question. Would the ISC be engaging in public outreach programs to share knowledge and experience gleaned through the management of the IS scheme over the past decade?
Through probably misinterpreting your question, or potentially not interpreting your question correctly. Are you referring to those within our community of practice that would, providing the avenue for those in our community of practice to share, or are you thinking more how the ISC will be able to translate or continue to translate lessons learned thus far?
General
if you can just give me the general public. Yeah, look, through, it's a great question. It is on the work plan, but probably not for another 12 to 18 months. And that's really just sort of reflective of the number of items we're currently working through at the moment. No problems.
Okay. I guess maybe just worthwhile pointing out, and I'm pretty sure Patrick, you might, or Patrick or Monique may be able to help. I think we do, at least on our website, so if others wanted to pick up that information, there is the 10-year report that we did just recently in celebrating our 10th year anniversary, and also the impact report. So there's certainly information available on the website that can be shared more widely.
That's a good point.
Thank you, Kerry. Great call out.
Okay. Thanks very much, everyone, for your time today. We hope this was a useful session. Obviously, there's much more detail that we can dive into, so really happy to have a chat. Please feel free to reach out if you want to hear more. And yeah, thanks again for your time. We will be sharing the slides after this presentation. We've got a short survey coming up as well. If you could take about 30 seconds to fill that in, that would be much appreciated and helps us create content that's really useful for you. So thanks very much.